Former YouTuber, fashion icon, Louis Vuitton ambassador, and 20-something podcast host Emma Chamberlain is all anyone can talk about this week. I don't know about you guys, but it's just video after video about her podcast or her philosophy or whatever it is all over my For You page. And today I'm going to be furthering the discussion around Emma Chamberlain and where I think she went wrong. Disclaimer. This is a huge disclaimer. This video is in no way meant to send any hate towards Emma, meant to be a hate video at all. I am purely giving constructive criticism in my opinion, and this is not at all meant to be a hateful video. In fact, I actually am a current listener of her podcast and have always been an Emma fan. I literally own Chamberlain coffee merch, so before y'all come for me, I love Emma so much. And this is just some constructive criticism given by yours truly, with the only qualification I really have being chronically online, but that seems to work for the subject. So if you're unfamiliar with what's been going on with Emma Chamberlain recently, consider yourself lucky. But before we get into her podcast and why people are so angry about it, let's do some background first. Emma Frances Chamberlain was born on May 22nd, 2001 in San Bruno, California, which currently makes her 22 years old. Her parents divorced when she was pretty young, about 5 years old is what I read. She has a whole podcast episode about this on divorce. She grew up as an only child in the San Francisco area, where she pursued all-star cheerleading, went to a private all-girls high school, and all of this right off the bat just tells us that she already comes from some sort of wealth. All of this is important for later. She started her YouTube channel sophomore year of high school around 2017, and her first video to really blow up was We All Owe the Dollar Store an Apology, which I'm sure if you're watching this video, you might have seen it. And it's currently sitting at about 4.5 million views. Quickly gaining popularity, she took her high school exit exam and moved to LA when she was about 17 years old. Since then, Emma's channel has fluctuated quite a bit over the years, and present day she occasionally posts, but nothing really similar with what she used to be doing. And now she's primarily focusing on her second podcast, which is Anything Goes, aka the one everyone is pissed about. And in addition to this, she also focuses on her coffee company, which is Chamberlain Coffee. So Emma's first podcast was actually called Stupid Genius, and it was basically a science podcast where she would answer questions and tell facts and that sort of thing and try and figure things out. It inevitably flopped because Emma has no background in science, didn't do a ton of research on that sort of thing. It wasn't her thing, and she even said it herself in an episode of her podcast. Currently, Emma has risen to celebrity status, in my opinion. I mean, she's hosted the Met Gala more than once, I think, also, is a Louis Vuitton ambassador, and honestly is quite elusive these days. And now I think you're all caught up on the Emma Chamberlain lore. Essentially, people on TikTok have been speaking out about how Emma's out of touch and she doesn't know what she's talking about, and basically how the direction that she's taken her podcast in just really doesn't fit her. And if you aren't familiar with her podcast, it's a Spotify video exclusive, just for the video version I think, where she sits in her bed and she discusses topics like philosophy or life advice. Her most recent episodes as of when I'm filming this video, November 6, 2023, are Fashion Identity Crisis, What is Good Taste, and most recent, Only You Know What's Good For You, which was posted yesterday. I've only listened to Fashion Identity Crisis out of these three, but honestly, I'm a frequent enough listener to where I feel like I already understand the general idea of her podcast. I've heard a lot of people calling Emma Chamberlain Emma Echo Chamberlain in relation to all of this discourse going on. And if you guys are unfamiliar with what an echo chamber is, firstly, I'm going to discuss what I think Emma did right with this podcast. Emma originally blew up because of her unique personality and relatability, and I think that a lot of her older podcasts shows this off really well with the type of content that she was making. And I also think that it resonates a lot more with her audience. Because think, who's listening to her podcast? Probably mostly her subscribers, which likely aren't older than around like 22, even though I would probably say that now her audience is still more 16 17 to like maybe 18-year-olds. And she's kept the same super chill older sister type of vibe where she's laying in bed and giving us, the viewers, her little advice. And honestly, I love that she's still stuck to that strong personal brand of just being very relatable, very casual, but I don't know how well it fits in with the direction that she's trying to take her podcast. And in my opinion, the better ones of the whole show are staying more within her original niche. So things like fashion, story times, and just straight up like rambling type of videos. She is a great storyteller and really shines through with these kinds of topics. I'm just gonna put a second disclaimer here because I really just like don't want anyone to think that I am hating on Emma, but I feel like I just have to do like a second disclaimer before I get into my criticisms. I am just trying to give her some constructive criticism and keep the discussion going. In no way am I meaning this to be any sort of hate towards Emma. Like I said before, Emma's been trying to take her podcast in a much more philosophical direction. And actually, controversial opinion, but I actually think that this would suit her pretty well. But the key problem is her audience. I've heard a lot of people saying how if they had heard this philosophy or heard this advice when they were like 16, then they would have been like, wow, like this is great advice, this is so impactful. But now that her audience, who has been growing up with her and starting to enter college and the workforce, I think that a lot of people are kind of realizing that this is unrealistic and quite out of touch for most regular people. And I have to agree with them on that because if you listen to her podcast, she really frequently goes off on side tangents or talks herself in circles, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but when you're trying to make a podcast discussing something like, is true love real, or something like that, which is like a real podcast episode of hers, you should have like a clear idea of where you're trying to go with that, even if it is a more open-ended question. And it just feels like there's not really much discussion and like she's really just talking in circles around herself. As well as this, she does give pretty emotionally driven advice when she does give advice. Like that episode I was just talking about, it's called Is Romantic Love an Illusion? And she posted that right after it became public news that she had a breakup with her significant other. And the whole episode, she's just kind of doesn't really give any evidence to back up her claims or her opinions. And it's just very obvious that it's just a very emotionally driven episode. And I think that these episodes actually have like some interesting questions that could be taken in an interesting direction, but they just really lack thorough research and discussion. That's honestly what's missing from it. And this is where I hear a lot of people saying stuff like, she needs to go to college, why doesn't she go to college? And the whole echo chamber thing. And I will admit her podcast is absolutely an echo chamber, but so are literally all of us in a way. Our friends are echo chambers, and especially, most prevalently, our TikTok FYPs are probably the most echo chambery of all. And honestly, I think how Emma could resolve this is by having a co-host of some sort or interviewing people much more often, which she does do occasionally on the podcast, but I think that she really just needs somebody else there. Differing opinions and another human's thoughts on a subject could make things really interesting instead of just having this one sole perspective and she's just talking to herself and kind of going in a loop. But I think this would be really great to like bounce ideas off of each other. You know, maybe Emma could learn something, the viewer could learn something, the co-host could learn something, and in addition to this, expand on ideas more, because she, a lot of the time, she'll bring something up and then she just doesn't go anywhere with it. She doesn't expand. And as for her getting told that she needs to go to college, here are my thoughts on that. I think that this is a very rude and blatantly hurtful thing to say to anyone, even if she's an influencer, like, oh, she's not gonna see it. Like, I just think that that's really elitist and a very rude thing to say. I will say though that I understand why people say this and why people feel this way, but I definitely don't think that a college degree is necessary to run a podcast. The reason people are saying this is because they're like, oh, like she just needs to go to a college class and have like a real discussion with peers and have people to bounce ideas off of, which I totally agree, but that absolutely does not have to be in a college setting. Honestly, it's just a part of a bigger issue that we see with a lot of influencers, that once they blow up, they just get stuck where they are and they stop learning. Not just in life in general, but like literally stop learning. And of course, I think that yes, everyone can benefit from higher education, and Emma Chamberlain is no exception to that. It's definitely not necessary for people to have knowledge or even be smart. But at the end of the day, she did come from an upper middle class background already. And with that comes being slightly out of touch. Honestly, I think that regardless if she became an influencer or not, she probably still would have been a little bit out of touch just because of her background, but being an influencer has definitely put her in the spotlight and probably magnified it a lot more than it would have been. However, I do think that considering her privilege, her power, and her money, that she should put her available resources to use. I think honestly Emma's just been a little bit lost herself being in her early 20s. I mean, she talks about it all the time on her podcast and is just trying to figure it out like the rest of us. Moving forward, I think that overall what would help Anything Goes move in the direction that she wants to take it in, all just ultimately circle back to Emma educating herself, whether that's with or without college. Being able to research something and then expand on that and then have a discussion about it and collaborate with other people on it, where they can add something new to the conversation, is where I think we would really see Emma flourish and grow and benefit from that. Overall, I think that she has a massive amount of privilege and should use it to educate herself, because she clearly has that desire within. You can tell in her discussions that she wants to be that person. She wants to be the girl who knows things and can give advice, but she just isn't quite there yet. And I think that education is really what she's missing. And like I said, it doesn't have to be with a college or a university. There's tons of other ways that you can learn things. She seems like a decently smart person with a good head on her shoulders as well. And I hope that all of this discourse has been taken constructively for her. I honestly think that the whole, even bigger issue with this whole thing is just influencer culture as a whole. But that'll have to be for another video because I cannot fit all of that in this one video. For now, thank you all so much for watching, and if you stayed until the end, double thank you to you guys. Let me know your opinion down in the comments and we can have a discussion about it. Do you think that Emma should have went to college, or what do you think she needs to do differently? Whatever it is, let me know.